I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Environment. Each week it's my privilege to bring guests that know something special about the environment, have opinions, have a basis for those opinions, and they don't really duck an argument about the environment. The environment is where we live and where we hope future generations will live. Our environment in Wisconsin, we're pretty fortunate. The eastern border, as your children will tell you if you don't remember, is pretty much Lake Michigan. A lot of beautiful water, important, scarce water. The western border is the Mississippi watershed, one of the biggest and greatest in the world. On the north, we've got Lake Superior and some real wilderness. In between, we probably have 15,000 lakes, 1,000,000 miles of streams, lots of public land, hiking trails, agriculture, and a lot of people with differing opinions as to who these resources belong to and what obligation we have about future generations. And that's why I find this subject, It's Your Environment, so interesting. And I try to get guests who know a lot more about it than I do, and that's really not very challenging sometimes. But here we have a guest today that is certainly one of my absolute favorites. He's an outdoor writer, makes a living at it, which is pretty rare. He's been very successful, but he's an outdoor thinker, and he's a hunter, a fisherman, makes his own boats by hand. If I were you, I'd listen to him. His name is Pat Durkin. Welcome to the show.
It's always fun to be here, George.
Tell me who you're writing with and for now.
These days, I have two main things now. Meat Eater, it's a national media group out of Bozeman, Montana. Right on their website, themeateater.com. And also, I still write my weekly column, and I started that column here, as you probably know, at the Oshkosh Northwestern back in the early 1980s, and I'm still writing it. And I write it. It appears in the Wisconsin Outdoor News, the Chetek newspaper, Bloomer, Ladysmith and Barron, Watertown, Anago, and I think Wisconsin Dells. So I'm still having fun with it.
And how many thousand articles do you think you've written about Wisconsin outdoors?
Well, the way you could probably do the math. I can't do it in my head, but I started writing that weekly column in 1984. So that's been 40 years, and I haven't missed a week yet. So that's 52 weeks a year and 40 years, and so I guess well over 2,000. And also my magazine writing, and these days internet writing. I know for Meat Eater I've written over 100 articles in the last 5 years. So that's one outlet. So I should say too, I actually have my 9-year-old granddaughter working right now, cutting apart magazines to clip all my articles out and put them in a 3-ring binder so that when I'm gone, there's some record of my having been here.
Well, I think that will be quite a record.
Yeah.
During what years did you write for the Northwestern?
I started writing for the Northwestern when I was in college here at UW Oshkosh in 1982, and I'd worked for them part-time in sports for like almost 2 years, and then they hired me full-time in the fall of '83, and then I worked in the sports department for 2 years, and my main goal there at Oshkosh when I first started was to get to the outdoor page. I would never do it full time because newspapers, even then, very few of them had full-time outdoor writers. But I also wanted to, keep my nose in the things I like. So I worked first in sports and the outdoors, and then I transferred over to news and covered the Oshkosh School Board and other odds and ends for 6-7 years. I stayed there a total of 8 years before I moved into the magazine world.
And didn't you or members of your family have a cottage or a lake home here?
My father and mother had a house up on Lake Poygan, and they own that through about 2018, and then my one of my nephews bought it, and so he still owns it. It's still in the family. I don't get down there as much as I used to because I moved up to Eau Claire 3 years ago, but we still have a lot of connections around this part of the state.
You did some hunting and fishing around here.
Oh
then.
yeah, oh yeah. I when I first got out of the Navy in 1980, I hunted Lake Poygan, for ducks, and I learned that my real passion I just had to concede was deer hunting, and so I'd spend all the time duck hunting and realized I'm just not that good at duck hunting. I still have all the gear, I have all the blinds that I hand tied back then from wire grass, and I took good care of them, took care of all my decoys, but I just don't do much duck hunting anymore.
Where have you hunted deer?
Boy, where haven't I? I've been hunting mainly Wisconsin, of course, but over the years, I hunted a lot from Ontario to northeastern Minnesota to the UP of Michigan. I've hunted Illinois. I've hunted most of the southern states for deer. I've hunted Idaho for deer. I'm going back to Idaho this fall for deer and elk. So I get around quite a bit.
And elk hunting, how long have you been doing that?
That I didn't start till I was, it was 2005, so I was just shy of my 50th birthday when I started elk hunting, but I've been doing it every year since, and I really enjoy that. But I think because I was so immersed in the deer hunting world and the deer hunting industry, so to speak, I didn't really get a chance to elk hunt till I was basically freelancing, and I started freelancing in 2001.
And the elk you've hunted, I assume, have been out west, although
Yeah,
we
yeah.
have elk now
Right.
in Wisconsin. Are
Yeah,
you excited
yeah,
about that?
Yeah, I keep applying for those 5 tags that we give out every year, and I've never been struck by lightning though, so I haven't gotten one yet. So.
Well, this first segment has gone real fast. We're
Okay.
going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about lots of things.
Okay.
Probably what you want to talk about.
Okay.
You share my concern about our environment
Yeah.
and what we're doing to it. And I would like to land on that lily pad.
You bet.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Environment. I'm George Curtis. Pat Durkin is my guest, and he's your guest too. And I love having conversations with Pat Durkin, and sometimes I shut up and just listen because I think that he sees things a little deeper than most of us do. And he has a view of the past and a hope for the future and a vision about our resources, which in this state are just absolutely fantastic, except, well, we've got some problems with the water that's underground. You can't drink it in some counties because of what we've done. And we've got some problems with invasives and pollution and algae on some of our surface water. Our air has dropped in quality, invasive fish, animals, CWD. It isn't exactly trouble-free. The situation we're giving our children and grandchildren isn't quite of the quality that was given to us. I'm often reminded of a quote Teddy Roosevelt supposedly termed it the reckless disregard for the future. What's your thought on that, Pat Durkin?
I'm optimistic, but I'm having a hard time with the optimism sometimes, because I look back into the early 70s, and the country seemed to really understand we couldn't continue on the path we were on of not worrying about water pollution and air pollution. In the early 70s, President Nixon, someone that we don't think about as being an environmentalist, he seemed to understand that this was what the country wanted and needed, and so we have things like the Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, those kind of things that really changed the course for America. And it really bothers me in more recent decade or so when people came along and basically acted like everything that we were benefiting from in the 2000s and 2010 era just happened by accident. And I thought, well, these folks, a lot of them, weren't really adults, or young adults anyway, like I was in the early 70s, mid 70s, when you really realized we couldn't continue on that course, and that clean water isn't an accident, and clean air doesn't just happen by accident, that you have to work at that stuff in this industrial age. And so I've been really upset with the course that Wisconsin took in 2010 when Scott Walker got in to be the governor, and we had things happen like over in the Central Sands region of south of Stevens Point, where all of a sudden you had the Attorney General of the state ruling that you don't have to have the DNR take everything into consideration when all these farmers start pumping water out of the groundwater, just pumping it out and not really controlling how much they're pumping out. It was just something that if it was on their land and they had permission and they could do it, they would do it. And before that, the DNR could regulate how much water you could pump out of those Central Sands, that region, and basically anywhere in the state. So now we finally reversed that after we had a change in the Supreme Court, about a year or so ago, a couple of years ago, and that just really those kind of things. I just don't know how we can be not more appreciative of where we've been and where we need to go in the future.
Well, you make a couple of good points, and I'm probably not nearly as accurate in my memory as yours, but it seems to me that the DNR secretary was not always a political appointment. And I remember one of my other favorite environmentalists, George Meyer, was appointed during a Republican governorship, but remained on when there was a Democrat, and seemed to me that he approached it from a scientific preservation of the resource. But after that, we had some people that acted like they'd been appointed to destroy the resource, turn public land free for speculators to make money, resist purchasing land for preservation for all of the people if it conflicted with the profit motive of promoters and developers and things like that. And I don't want to pick on one party or the other, but I haven't seen a lot that's impressed me since George Meyer.
George was, I think, a good man. He was the last DNR secretary we had who came up through the ranks of the DNR. And, before him it was Buzz Basadny, who was another DNR employee. They worked his way up through the ranks, and George did the same. I think George's background was the legal side of the DNR. Just got to correct you on one minor point, but yeah, he was appointed by Tommy Thompson, a Republican. And actually, I should back up. I got it wrong. He was appointed by the Natural Resources Board. And then in '95, Tommy Thompson authored this idea of having the governor appoint the DNR secretary. So Tommy got that through in his budget in '95, but when Tommy was reelected, he still kept George Meyer as DNR secretary. I think Thompson recognized, this wouldn't be smart to dump the DNR secretary when it's the first time under your control. Well, Tommy eventually went on to Washington D.C. with the Bush administration, and his replacement, his lieutenant governor, took over, and was it Scott McCallum. And McCallum got rid of George.
Oh,
and
I see.
Then McCallum appointed, I think, I'm forgetting the man's name, Darrell something now. But anyway, the point is, George was the last one ever appointed by the Natural Resources Board. Tommy kept him on, and he was a good man. Since then, we've had nothing but political appointees, And right now we're sitting. We had a guy get appointed a year ago, and he resigned, I think, in December, and we're sitting here 3 months later, still no DNR secretary, and people aren't even asking, where's the DNR secretary? Why don't we have one? And I start worrying because I don't think these things happen, like I said, by accident. We gotta have leadership. I really believe in having one person in charge and having enough, you hope anyway, independence of thought to give us a good course. One little term I've come up with over the years, a little motto, whatever, is that every ship has a captain, no ship has co-captains. And I just don't think you should run the DNR basically by a bunch of people at the top level, not really without one person really in charge.
That's a good thought to end our second session.
Okay.
When we come back after a short break, I'm going to ask for your thoughts. What is most at risk? Our air, our water, our land, our health? What should citizens be doing about it?
Mm-hmm.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Environment. I'm George Curtis. My guest, Pat Durkin, is going to tell us what we should be most worried about. Our water, our air, our children, our animals, our farming. We've got a lot going on, and you're our watchdog.
Well, I guess my answer is all those things. I think all those things work together. They all play off each other. They all intertwine, and if we don't take care of them, you can't just let one go and then think the other ones will make up for it. So I pay attention when we have days and days and days in the summer, and we have air advisories because there's so much smoke pouring down from Canada forest fires or the Western Western forest fires, or Texas forest fires, what we're seeing right now. And so that should concern us. I worry too, and I just don't know how any politician, I don't care what their party is, can stomach it when their constituents have to get their water by going down to the local school with bottles and filling them up. You know, you just think that when that starts happening, you would think those politicians, if they really gave a damn about their constituents, would go up and try to figure this out and say, we can't do this. This is just not sustainable to live like that, especially in this day and age, as we say. So those things, water. I remember when we had this big fight about 25 years ago or so out in Adams County area, in Juneau County area, where Perrier wanted to come in and sink a well to get water. And we had a big fight about it statewide because the governor, Thompson, those guys, they wanted Perrier to come in and start pumping water out for the bottled water industry, and a lot of people fought it. And the theme I kept hearing people bring up a lot was that when you get right down to it, mankind has gotten along in the past without burning oil, but we've never gotten along, and humans can't get along, nothing can get along without good water. And so we should really prize that water and protect it. And you think how in Wisconsin we tend to just take water for granted. We're like you did a great segment talking about we're bordered on three sides by incredible water systems, Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, and the Mississippi. And when friends of mine have left Wisconsin over the years and gone west, the one thing they become aware of very fast is how much they took our lakes and streams for granted, that you don't have such easy access to water for your recreation and your fishing and all that kind of stuff. Out in even Iowa does not have that kind of resources. So I get a little defensive and protective when people start just assuming it's going to be fine. You can just look to their way and let people do whatever they want with it. And I think, no, we're a society, I think society, I still believe in the idea that we all have to work together to solve problems in this country.
Well, I think those are good points. I think all of this is so precious, and I have a wife who thinks it's not too late to open my mind, so she commits me one weekend a month to go somewhere in the state of Wisconsin to learn something
Yeah.
and to appreciate it. Last weekend, she took me to Stevens Point. We went to the DNR Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Very
And
good.
boy, that was fascinating. And George Meyer's in it, along with some of the other people that you mentioned. Something else that she's trying to get me to do is this Ice Age trail.
Right.
She knows where it goes
Right.
all over the state.
Yeah.
What a wonderful thing! I mean, we don't walk very far.
Underused in many parts of it. Don't get much traffic.
Oh no,
Yeah.
no! If you're familiar with it, please tell our viewers where all it goes. You can't get away from it.
Yeah.
No matter where you are, you're close to it.
I've only myself been on portions of it around Wapaka, but you can follow the Ice Age Trail down into the Cross Plains area west of Madison, out to basically follows where the glacier, ended up in the state, But I know I used to go out and run a little section of it out by Wapaka, and it always struck me, and I didn't do it every week, but every time I ran that little 2-mile section, I never saw anyone on it. And it's such a beautiful little, you sometimes get your feet wet with mud and whatever, but there's a lot of good volunteers that keep that trail going, and it's just a wonderful thing. There's even people who run the whole thing. You can't do it in a day. It takes many days. And there's actually, you can look it up, but I don't know what the record is, but how fast one guy ran it, or women, I can't remember if it's a woman or a man that owns the record right now. But those are the kind of things Wisconsin is full of, wonderful things we can do that I'll never explore in my lifetime.
And we can't forget biking. We
Right.
can't forget the fact that we have the Flambeau National Forest, the one in the eastern part of the state, Nicolay
Yeah.
National Forest.
Nicolay,
We have so
Schwamigan,
many state forests, school forests, and public areas
Right.
where we can go. We have so much land and access to water that belongs to all of us.
Right.
And most of us are guilty of not using it.
Well, I talk to people quite often. They'll start talking about, well, the reason our hunter numbers are going down, that we're losing hunters, because we don't have much access. And I always tell them, if you want to see tough access, go down south. Everything's privately owned. Wisconsin, we have so much access. It might not be in your backyard, but it's usually within a pretty short drive. And so we have lots of hunting access in this state. So you never convince me that the problem in Wisconsin is the lack of public access. We have good public lands, whether the county owns it, the state owns it, the federal government owns it. We have lots of public land in this state.
Well, not only that, we have 15 million miles of streams. And I believe the Supreme Court case that I read way back when says that it's public.
Right.
If you get your feet wet in it. So it only has to be that deep, and you can walk right down the stream.
If you can float your, these days, the little kayak down it, it's navigable water. Therefore, it's open to the public.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're about out of time, but
Okay.
speaking of kayaks, I've got to hear about that cedar boat you built by hand. Where is it, and are you using it?
It's coming up on, this is the 20th anniversary of me starting to build it. I launched it in I laid down the keel in February of 2004. I launched it in June of 2006, and this winter I built a second pair of oars for it. A mutual friend of ours, Wayne Yeide, built my original oars, and I got the bug this winter to build my own pair of oars, because it's a boat you can row with 2 people. And for musky road trolling, which I like to do a couple times a year, I have a buddy that was always complaining about using the backup oars, which were a couple of junkers. And so I said, next year you'll have you'll have your own oars to use, and I'll make them myself. And so I did that this winter. I made my first pair of oars, and I love that kind of stuff.
Well, you do, and you represent the love of Wisconsin, and all of us should be envying the life that Pat Durkin lives.
Well, thank you.
You're doing the kinds of things that most of us just fantasize doing, but you have lived and breathed and studied and educated all of us about Wisconsin.
Well, thank you.
I need you to come back often to bring us up to date.
Thank you, George.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Teddy Roosevelt warned us about the reckless disregard of our future. I can't get that statement out of my head, and I can't be more grateful for people like George Meyer and Pat Durkin and many others who will not let us forget that these resources don't just belong to us, they belong to all of us, no matter where we live, and they belong to our children. And the responsibility to make sure that our children get healthy resources is ours. I'm George Curtis, and that's my opinion.